Good evening, everyone. Tonight is a work session of the South Kingstown Planning Board. The date is Tuesday, May 14th, 2024. The time is 6:40. Our first agenda item is roll call. Joe Murphy.
Here.
Susan Axelrod.
Here.
Robin Pothier.
Here.
Liz Carp.
Here.
Peter DiStefano.
Here.
Kuiper Wilson.
Here.
Susan Axelrod. And Maria Mack is here. Our next agenda item is land use regulatory matters, land use regulatory changes, new legislation, as well as legal and the role of the TRC. Who would like to begin with this? Is this an Andy thing or a Jay and Ryan?
Go ahead, Andy.
Yeah, I think it's an Andy thing, if you want. I mean, you've also got update on legal issues at the end. So I don't know if you'd rather, if you'd rather put this at the end and do your other stuff first, or if you want to get into it now. I mean, there's a lot of new stuff, as you know, Maria. In fact, the House is voting, or presumably voted on 7981 tonight. I mean, all the Democrats
They
were
did.
for it, only the Republicans were objecting, so I'm sure it passed.
Yes.
It did. So, I mean, but on the other hand, it still has to go to the Senate, and it's actually telling that there is not a Senate companion for it, so it might die in the Senate. So I don't know how much of this stuff you want to talk about where it's still pending, and we don't necessarily know what's going to happen.
Right. I think probably what would be most useful will be things that have passed that will require us to make changes to our ordinances or process and so on, that we haven't already discussed.
Yeah, and I'm going up on Thursday to testify on the ADU bill along with Jane.
Yes.
Yeah. We're also have a memo. Well, we've had this draft memo for about 3 weeks. It keeps getting changed with all the sub-As, but I think now that they've left the House, we're going to send this out within the next couple of days. So you'll get that in more detail. On the ADUs, I think it was actually something recently from Jane. It seems like it's going, if what they have got the Senate to agree on goes through, it seems that it might be actually correcting a lot of stuff of the ADUs. I think the key things were that, and I know you know this, Maria, but for the others, that it would be owner occupied, or at least it would be a choice of the municipality if they wanted to make it owner occupied. As far as for the by right ADUs, that people could just do it. There also will be restrictions to keep them out of short-term rentals, and hopefully actually to make it all year-round rental. Some carves out for environmental uses, and a nice thing about that, they wouldn't be counted towards the density bonus if it's part of a comprehensive permit. And of course, actually, you had one of these a while ago where they were basically, all the affordable units were ADUs. So they're saying that would not count. So that looks helpful, but we never know what'll actually come out at the end.
And you're saying owner occupied, I assume you're talking about one or the other, either the main house or the ADU?
Yes.
Yes.
That's right. That's right. You could have the ADU as the owner occupied and rent out the main house. So, but the idea that at least one of them would be, you wouldn't be able to just have a rental property and rent it out. I mean, it's hard to say too until, the exact language and whatnot, but it probably would allow someone who had a multifamily, like a 3-family, and they lived in one of the units in the 3-family, probably could also put an ADU. They probably wouldn't have to necessarily live in the whole house, but as long as they were living on the property, that would seem to be the key thing. Which, actually is, I think, good. That's the key thing. If the owner lives on the property, then someone's going to care about it. So, floor area ratio passed the state. Basically, you're be prohibited from including basement areas when the calculation of the floor area ratio. I don't know that that's really a big deal.
We don't have FAR.
Yeah, so it's not necessarily a big thing. Inclusionary zoning, I think, that actually looks very good. It's correcting a lot of stuff. It will bring the ratio back, the density, to basically a 1-to-1 ratio on the density bonus, as opposed to the 2-to-1 ratio that you get two extra units for every affordable. Bring it down to 1-to-1. And it would allow you to provide or require it basically with 15% as opposed to the current 25%. And then again, the current 25% no, if you can go for a comp plan if you got 25%, so why bother? But if we can offer something for less to people that will create it without going to the comp plan, that's a way to do it.
You meant comp permit,
Comp
but we knew
permit,
what you were
sorry.
talking about. But it does provide that other option in that
Yes,
regard, so that's a good thing.
That's right, yep. And also that it would apply only to the ones that are built at the density bonuses on the development itself. Off-site or, fee in lieu or so forth would not render the development eligible for a density bonus. So that's good. The revised bill, unfortunately, the idea of giving the planning board the option, that did not make it through. It's still not, if you're gonna have it, they have the right, the developer has the right to do it, you don't have the option. And they've also mucked around a little bit with the fee in lieu stuff. So you may still wanna leave fee in lieu out of it. So, because again, it's the
Right,
developer's choice.
Right, they didn't correct the amount per lot. They used the same calculations, and they didn't eliminate that if you don't use the money within 2 years, it goes back to Rhode Island
Right,
Housing,
yeah.
which we all thought was quite unfair.
So they fixed some stuff, but not all of it. So, the zoning enabling, the one that's kind of the catch-all of a batch of changes, 7949, which was also like a triple A bill, 3 separate amendments to it and whatnot. That's kind of weird because it changes the definition of development plan review. Last year's list was including but not limited to. This year's is an exclusive list. This is the only things that you can do development plan review for. On the other hand, it makes it optional, so rather than mandatory. So, I don't know where this is gonna go, whether it's gonna go through the Senate, is it gonna get changed up? It fixed a lot of things, fixed a lot of little things that were wrong in the act, but that's kind of the biggest thing there, that development plan review is kind of strange. Looks like it may be limited to just a very small set of particular uses.
Andy, on that,
And I always thought it was wrong to begin with, even the ones that I always thought it was written backwards to begin with. So, go ahead, say.
oh, no, I was just going to say, I think, in my opinion, we need a lot of assistance with the DPR versus land development project.
Yes.
The new changes encompass a number of different categories that have relatively large numbers as to what qualifies for what, and it seems to me there's quite a bit of overlap with how we consider DPR, or how we have considered DPR up until today, versus what those changes do at the state level to affect that. So I think we really, that's one aspect that we need some clarity on, as to how do our DPR qualifiers, what qualifies for a DPR, how does that jive with the definition of major land development or land development?
This is probably a naively optimistic question, but at one point we had talked about creating a hybrid model of both, renaming it, is that something that we could still consider, or is this so prescriptive that that wouldn't be possible?
I think the latter. I don't think it'd be possible to create our own thing. I mean, I think my idea always was, kind of a scaled thing. The things that, were easy or small would be development plan review, quick, easy process. Things that were a little bit more would be minor land development projects, and then you'd have major land development projects. They seem to have either flipped DPR and minor land development projects, particularly because minor land development projects are now staff-based mostly, rather than going to the planning board, or they've conflated them. I mean, my hunch is when this is over, we probably will eliminate one or the other, eliminate development plan review or eliminate minor land development projects and just have one or the other, because I don't know that there's a reason to keep them both when we get through with this. That's my hunch.
Yeah, and I agree. I think there may be some level to incorporate them one and the same. I was reading one of the bills this morning, and I think there was a reference to development plan review and preliminary plan in the same sentence. So, when I read that, I don't know how to take that, because we do DPRs as one and done, not as there's a second stage, but then some of the the legislation reads like there are two components to it. So if there are two components to it, then, we would have to build that in, but that's more like a land development project, so.
It seems like that's something that indicates a lack of understanding in those that develop this language and will need to be corrected at some point, rather than us doing somersaults to try to figure out. Right?
And I would like to know, are we doing it, is there truly two phases to DPR and we're doing it wrong? Or?
No. Well, there wasn't. There might be, but not yet. So, I guess I'll reiterate what we said all along. It's still very much the wild, wild west, and we're gonna be doing it as we go along. As someone described, we're building the landing gear while we're still flying the plane. So, I anticipate, yes, another round of changes come July. After the legislature adjourns, I anticipate another round of changes. And then, we'll probably be doing even more changes next spring or whatever as we see how things go and how things work. Some of the stuff is just taking time to figure out how it works.
Has anyone, either in South Kingstown or any other municipality, tried to calculate the amount of staff hours that it will take to reorganize, implement some of these changes? Because it's considerable.
No.
Yes, the answer is no, and I don't think anyone wants to know. Anyone outside of municipalities who are responsible for it really want to know.
I mean, in a way, we were lucky because a lot of development dropped off last fall while all the developers were waiting for the new laws to take effect. So that actually kind of lowered the standing workload to allow time to do some of the stuff there. But it was a lot of work. We were down here a lot more often, and yeah, it is. Financial guarantees, this is now basically saying you got to give the developers 3 separate acceptable terms of financial security. You can't have a maintenance guarantee of more than 10% of the construction guarantee. So those are kind of the only significant changes. It requires timely staffs, but that's, timely staff inspections, but that's nothing new. That should be happening anyway. But, so if we don't give them 3, we've got to come up with a third one. But, I think the thing is to still give them 3 things without having them provide insurance company bonds, because those are the things that are impossible to collect on a bond. You know, either let them deposit the money in an account, some sort of surety there, do the construction ahead of time, you know, and some other element. We got to figure out a third way to offer them something to avoid that insurance bond. The comp planning stuff, they had a little consistency issue about all municipal land use decisions have to be in conformance with it if the plan has not been updated and adopted within 12 years, and that wasn't clear. It made it sound like it just expired completely and whatnot. So they cleared up that program. So basically the answer is if you don't have your plan updated or readopted within 12 years, the real thing is you're basically not going to be able to deny a lot of stuff, comp permits and other land use decisions if you don't have it. That's the gist of it. Then there's the bill about electronic submission of planning and zoning applications, and you know, this is one of those things that could be good or bad. It basically, the bad part is it kind of puts it under the building standards, building code, and state building inspection and those. But they already have set it up with, they have all the online permitting for the building permits. And as I think I may have noted before, I was actually working, a year and a half ago, I was on a committee that was involved with this. Before it was required by law, under the Department of Business Regulation, they were working on it, and you know, they had a group of planners and we were helping them to do the workflow. So now the workflow has changed with all the new law, but you know, assuming they do the same thing and get an advisory panel that includes people who are actually working day to day with this stuff to set it up, I think it could be very good, because I think it helps a lot with the checks and balances, with everybody having to sign off automatically of things getting missed. Things don't get missed as often if you have the automated things. And it does, you know, make it easier for applicants, particularly, you know, if they're not wanting to have something major, you know, makes it a lot easier for them to file their applications. Probably will not make it much easier for the big, huge applications anyway. But it'll make it easier for us to track them. So as long as I said, the key thing will be getting it right to begin with, to make sure that they put, you know, it's the old garbage in, garbage out. The key thing is to make sure we collect the right information going in. So then we'd be able to use it. You know, at the moment, this is just, you know, requires studies and so forth to do it. But, you know, it's going to be becoming, it will be required within a certain period of time. The other thing, 7979 Combined Review Board, this is going through, this is basically allowing, this is optional. The option is to establish one board, basically get rid of your zoning board, essentially, and have one board that does it. And I think this is where we're going. The idea right now, the planning board's already taking over all the zoning stuff if it includes any planning element, and this would basically kind of take it over completely. You'd have one board that would grant all of your relief. At the moment, that would leave a zoning board. The only thing that I would see that a zoning board would still have would be appeals from a historic district commission, since the appeals from the planning board now go to Superior Court. And if you had one combined thing, and I think that's probably something that is either in the works or someone's overlooked, but it'll happen. You know, appeals from historic district commission will just go straight to Superior Court as well, and then you won't have any need. You'll just have one board. That's what I see in a couple of years. They've made it optional now, but that's the path forward.
But what about the municipality's ability to process the applications with one board versus two?
Well, I mean, the answer is, yeah, it's more work for one board. But they say they have but it's half the people you need to find for the board. The staffing thing won't really make any difference. You're still processing the same applications. And you might be doing it less if you have less steps, because you're not having,
Specifically this board, I mean, if we have agendas coming up that have 5 significant items within 2 weeks on
Yeah.
two separate agendas.
yeah. you're gonna-
Imagine sprinkling in decks and sheds.
I was just
and
going to say that,
everything
Someone wants to
else.
add on to a deck, I mean, that's,
Well, I mean, the good news is hopefully some of that, more of that stuff is dropping out with modifications and things like that. Or you might be meeting more than 2 times a month. That will be the quid pro quo of having one board, but a board that meets more often. I'm just saying, you don't I don't know if that's the handwriting on the wall that I see. I could be wrong. So, manufactured homes, I think this has been fixed. I mean, basically, the idea is to encourage use of manufactured homes. Whether it actually will allow someone to put a mobile home on any lot, it looks like it does, but they're gonna have to be on a permanent foundation, which the big thing there helps. They're required either way to have the permanent utility hookup, but at least with a permanent foundation, you got much more of a chance. They're gonna have to get a building permit, and you're gonna actually have the utility hookups, as opposed to someone just parking a mobile home on someplace and living there without it. But that seems to be what it will allow. There's always a bit of confusion between modular and manufactured is the problem, and mobile. And the problem is manufactured and mobile are kind of defined the same by the federal standards, and so they're included in here rather than breaking it apart. The goal was to make it easy for the manufactured homes and modular homes and not require them to have double permitting. If they have certification where they were manufactured and whatnot, that they wouldn't require the whole same stuff for the local building permit that a stick-built house would have. That, I think, was the goal. I think they've gone beyond that. And maybe that was part of the goal too, that was just there, provide more housing. They have a lot, they can't afford a home, they can put a mobile home on it till they can afford something else. Residential uses 7981. I don't know, we call it the planners call it the Frankenstein bill, because it was attempted several different things. It was attempting to fix the adaptive reuse stuff that was wrong. And then it got changed to be allowing commercial use in any zone, residential use in any zone
in any commercial
whatsoever,
zone.
in commercial zones, and then it was gonna require multifamily housing in 30% of the land area, and it's a mess.
it is.
So,
And it was referred to as the Frankenstein bill on the floor today, interestingly enough, yes.
Okay, well, anyway, and we had a brief victory when it was actually almost unheard of, when it was sent back for study in committee, when it wasn't even on for hearing. June Speakman did that, and then, she was publicly chastised by the speaker, made sure it got the press, and, and now, and when it came up again, the speaker and the majority leader were there at the committee meeting to cast their votes, because they're voting members of every committee. And the minority leader was there as well, but, they are normally not there to vote, but they were there to make sure everybody voted for it and
And
passed.
one of the things, I think, what are we at, 1% for our commercial property? And many communities are in that situation, and the idea that to potentially lose those commercial properties is not something that's good for any of the communities.
I think
How long have we
there's
been
a,
trying to get a Main Street program going in this state?
I think there's an equally large, if not larger, problem with industrial properties. Because once you drop a residential use in an industrial zone, you're going to preclude industrial uses all around that property, because nobody's going to want to deal with that nuisance complaint in the future.
We did get some good changes to the adaptive reuse. They took, without trying to be arrogant here, they did take some of my suggestions on the adaptive reuse. So again, if the communities, if we get out there, that's one of the things we're gonna have to get out there in July and do, is define the areas where we don't want them for public health and safety reasons, and really define that areas. And we've now got a limit to any industrial building which has not been vacant for less than 2 years. Actually, I had fixed the double negative, but anyway, so at least someone who's got an industrial building and wants to convert it is gonna have to let it sit vacant for 2 years, or it's gonna be an industrial building that at least has been vacant for 2 years. Obviously, we wanted a lot more. We started with 10 and we're trying for 5, because we wanted to make sure these buildings were not prematurely taken out of circulation. But
How does the town confirm when they are indeed vacant?
I don't know. I think it'll be what we call a case-by-case analysis.
I mean, how long was Schneider Electric on the market? Long time, and it finally just sold. Thankfully, to another industrial user.
Right. Well, I mean, I was trying to get the other stuff. I was trying to get the limit on the 1.5-story buildings and below, that they couldn't be converted. And was trying to get a longer time frame there, but they didn't take that. And then we got a little bit of, few nice things changed with the adaptive reuse, although the density kind of dropped out completely. We were trying to change it from the lot area per dwelling unit to the floor area, and kind of dropped out completely just to say what high density, and high density isn't defined.
Can you define adaptive reuse really good?
Adaptive reuse is reusing, is conversion of a non-residential structure such as commercial or industrial or school or church or other institutional building to residential use or mixed use with at least 50% residential component of it. That's what adaptive reuse is. And for
that definition?
it's right in here somewhere.
It's not in the definitions.
I don't know.
No, there's a separate statute that defines it.
Yeah, yes, oh, right, it cross-references
And
the other
it's
statute.
much broader than that. It's much broader than what you just,
Right. Well, the stuff that I have are limits within here, like the 50% on the mixed use and so forth. And for what it's worth, our office has interpreted that to mean that if you have an existing mixed-use building, you are not eligible for adaptive reuse. If you already have residential and commercial in a building, you are not eligible for this basically loophole that would let you change it to all residential. So like, for example, your mixed-use buildings down on Main Street, residential upstairs, commercial downstairs. Our interpretation is you cannot use that to convert the first floor to residential. They're already mixed use, therefore, you're not reusing them. If you change them, they're just not eligible. That has not been tested anywhere, that's just our interpretation.
When you mentioned abandoned property or vacated, is that really when just no one's occupied it for 2 years or 3 years? Like Bobby G's, is that vacant and abandoned?
I don't know,
And
because,
I was just going to share, in my experience with considering abandonment the way it's laid out in zoning, they can use any form of background information to show that it was in fact abandoned, or that there was no intent. That basically what they're trying to do is show there was no intent to abandon. So if we had an abandoned property and we wanted to take enforcement action on them, they could come in with an MLS listing and say, I've been trying to sell it for 3 years or 2 years. There's no intent to abandon, just can't find a buyer for it. And so by extension, I'm not sure how that,
well, this doesn't use the word abandoned, it just says vacant. Right. So it doesn't, you don't have to get into that issue. The idea behind it was that same idea that industrial properties do often sit on the market for a while. And it was kind of a fallback position. I mean, I'd rather not see them doing it at all, but it was a fallback position, at least, that the property would have to be vacant for a considerable period of time before you could convert it to the residential. That there, a much less likelihood that it would be reused for industrial purposes. But they took part of it and put the 2 years in there. So, as I said, it does prevent someone who's got an industrial use now from just making the change. They'd have to hit a little bit of a hardship. They're gonna have to let it sit vacant for 2 years if they think they're gonna do it. So it's a little bit of a disincentive for someone to do it. I think the bigger, more important thing will be for the community to define where we find it's a health and safety standard, which are those places amongst all the other industrial uses that we don't want the residential, because it will drive out the other industrial uses. And I think we can legitimately say it's a health and safety when it's in amongst them. Where we have some isolated industrial uses, we're probably gonna have to, leave those alone and allow the possibility of their conversion.
Economically unfair, in my opinion.
We don't talk about fairness. That's a whole nother issue if we talk about fairness. Wetlands Bill 7982. This is basically continuing the process of, taking control, clarifying that it's DEM and CRMC regulating wetlands and wetlands buffers and distances from water bodies, that it's their role, not the municipalities. Mobile home and and LMI units, 7984A. This is this one that basically, so that if you can have a mobile or manufactured home be affordable housing without the 30-year restrictions if it's a primary residence of the occupants, it's located within a resident-owned community, and it complies with federal standards for manufactured homes. And these would all get to count as half of a unit towards your 10%. So it really is a fairly narrow thing because of that resident-owned community thing. If it's a privately owned landowner who can increase the rents at will, it doesn't count. If it's a resident-owned community like the one in West Greenwich, and I think there are a couple others that Rhode Island Housing has helped finance the owners to buy out the mobile home park, then they get to count, the town gets to count that as half of an affordable unit, even without any 30-year restrictions. Miscellaneous study commission for the educational system for planners. I mean, that's actually a good thing. That would basically, I think they realize now that it's 20 years almost, that it was not a good thing to have URI get rid of its planning program. We don't have planners in the pipeline. Everybody is either, the experienced ones move from place to place and just play musical chairs. And, trying to get young ones, you're getting people right out of planning school. You're getting people who have no experience or even some on the senior level, getting people who have no experience in Rhode Island whatsoever, where before there was kind of a pipeline. People would come out of school, they'd work as interns, and they'd start as, planning technicians and assistant planners, and they'd work their way up. And that's all dried up, so we're at that program. So I think they're trying to do it. And I believe they did amend it to put a couple of planners on the committee. Originally, it had no planners. It was all just education people from the different colleges and whatnot, and educational programs, and no planners on it. Now it's got 2 planners, I think, on it. So that's good. building code education for building code, building officials, so forth. And then an abandoned property list. This is making the towns, this is going further, taking what was already there, but going further about making the towns basically inventory their abandoned properties and provide the list. And I think, you know, the idea is that's the first step. You provide the list of these abandoned properties, and then they can become converted into housing over time through various mechanisms. And again, I don't think they define abandoned in this, so it's kind of thing. But, you know, the idea is your surplus schools, or if the town is, you know, covering abandoned properties, you know, mortgaged homes that are, foreclosed homes that are sitting abandoned. I know people are scared that, you know, these are automatically gonna become housing. That's not there yet. And probably wouldn't become through this mechanism. But it might provide an opportunity. Here's a list, people who want to do comprehensive permits, people who want to get financing, Rhode Island Housing, whatnot. Here's an opportunity to do it. So, and as far as the particular agenda item of TRC, I mean, it's just too early to tell. Until we know what's going to happen with development plan review and minor land development,
Especially
we
the
can't
minor
tell,
level.
we can't tell what's going to happen with the technical review committee.
So I can shed some light on that, I think. Can you guys read that? So this is the language from the state law. And if you notice, so DPR, the way we do DPR now is that it goes to TRC and for an advisory, and it comes to the planning board for a decision. Those are the allowable uses that would be considered under DPR: change of use, adaptive reuse projects, and specifically reference adaptive reuse project no more than 9 residential units in a residential zone, development in a designated urban or growth center, development in a historic district. What is troubling, what the issue is, though, is the definition for minor land development project is much more specific and with a lot more authority. 7,500 gross square feet of floor area, of new gross floor area. So even a brand new development may not make it to the planning board because it's considered a minor land development project, which is required to get approved at TRC or via the administrative officer after TRC. So my point earlier was, you know, we need to look at how our existing DPR, which is much, much, much less than this, jives with these definitions. With that said, the board, I think, everyone needs to understand that these minor land development projects, these relatively large projects that are going to come before the town, are going to go to TRC subject to AO approval without necessarily a public hearing, or without the planning board, without it coming to the planning board.
There's nothing minor about some of these.
No. And I think that's the true purpose of this agenda item, was to put it out there and figure out, well, one, we have to correct our language so that because I'm not comfortable to say that I know exactly how we're going to process these things or what we're going to do. Nor do I think other people are aware that these are going to come to TRC and not go any further.
Absolutely not. And I think there will be a hue and cry from the public when this is discovered. And the idea of the potential for adding additional planning board member or members to the TRC to help create a greater sense of input and awareness is, I think, one thing that's been discussed in some communities. But this will be a big deal, and the public will be, I think, quite upset. I mean, 10,000 square feet. Minor is now up to 9 units. I thought that there was something under the 9 units that said something about where no road creation exists, but I don't see it here.
And the odd thing is that you look at how large and specific these are,
Mhm.
and then when you look at the language for DPR, it's vague and
overlapping.
overlapping.
The adaptive reuse stuff is
Right.
overlapping.
So the only way the planning board would ever see a project of a minor land development project is if they are compliant. They don't require any waivers and they don't require any variances. That would be the only trigger mechanism to bump them up where they would need UDR from the planning board to grant those waivers and relief. And I don't know what the correct answer is on this. I don't know what the correct answer is for the community, for the town to undertake. I don't know how it's going to play out based on the types of applications that we've received in the office. I do seem to feel like there is a general uptick in the number of inquiries and the number of applications that we are receiving since the changes to the legislation. I don't know if there's a correlation to that, but it certainly seems like more people that are calling are perhaps more knowledgeable, or they heard the legislation change. Can I do this? Can I do that? But it causes a little bit of a headache for us knowing that this is in the background and we don't know what to do with it.
Right.
Now, Andy, is that something that your office could help our office kind of figure out?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think we have to, as I said, I think we have to wait to see what actually passes. I guess I'm hoping a lot of this stuff may die in the Senate. But
But as far as this goes, this
non-exclusive until it passes. So, but yeah, I mean, one of the things to do is basically to publicize the DPR process, the technical review committee process more. If you're doing it through the minor, have the stuff go to the technical review committee for an advisory opinion to the administrative officer. And publicize that, with your agenda items. It's not a public hearing, people aren't gonna have the right to talk, but at least they'll have the ability to know what's going on, to have it there.
we're gonna have to make the meetings at night. No,
I think you could still do it during the daytime.
but I think that's gonna be one of the gripes that we're gonna.
Absolutely.
we're
There
gonna
was
hear.
always concern with TRC that it was during the daytime and people who work would not be able to attend. And I think the additional issue is that if they are not allowed to speak at all because the perception that it then may turn into a public hearing, I think you need to find a way to balance that,
Well,
because
I
to
think-
completely silence
I think
them
we
is
did,
not fair.
And we did have, Brian had that great idea we talked about the last time about the public comment, the written comment, that they would have the ability to provide written comment for a certain period of time after the, 10 days or whatever, after the TRC. So they wouldn't feel they had nothing that they could do. They can contribute it in writing. The administrative officer then has the TRC recommendation and this written comment to make the decision on.
And I will say, on the other side of the spectrum, I always approach things from both sides and say, is it fair? If you, as a resident, are putting together an application for something, anything, whether it's a single-family house, a shed, or a commercial strip mall, we have regulations to guide that development, and if you're coming in with an application that meets all of the criteria that we set forth, I think there's some merit to that. I think some people upstate might be questioning, well, why would you have a planning board review of that in the first place? If you're telling people, here are the rules, here's what you need to do, and they follow all of them, and they meet all of the conditions, where it becomes a little fuzzy is when there's an intensity of use component that is hard to articulate, or where it can't be captured via regulation. It's just very difficult to process, and I don't, like I said, I don't know what the right direction is to get the best of both worlds, to make sure that the town is protecting its interests while at the same time the residents as well.
Can I ask a question? If these things will come before the town without review, can we beef up our landscape regulations, our stormwater regulations, and other things so now we get to sort of ask applicants to make the buffer nicer? Can we make the regulations more in line with what our board would like to see, so that if they're just following the regulations, that we have a little bit more teeth in our applications?
I think you can, with proper justification and reasoning as to why you're requiring that. And something to be concerned about is alternative consequences. We may be imposing stricter standards on projects we had no intention to do, but because we put this general blanket that we don't want these guys to get away with it, so we're going to up the bar, now we're going to hold everybody to that bar, whereas those projects you might think were great and they didn't need it, but now because we are doing that, there's unintended consequences sometimes with that.
Well, we've been talking about a redo of our landscape regulations, which are 20 years old, for 6 or 7 years now, and it will be even more important for those to be revised so that if an applicant comes in and they are then compliant and do not need waivers, it will work out to a better project, because not only are the landscape regulations in different parts of our ordinances, they are just not useful.
Our existing regulations are built around parking lots,
Right.
and there's not much else.
There's more to it than that.
There's some additional requirements in the multi-household land development projects, but for the most part, the rest of it is controlled by parking and screening of parking areas. And to some extent, the transitional landscaping requirement, which is basically when you have adjacent uses that are not compatible. So if you had a commercial use next to a residential use, like a zone boundary line, there's a requirement for transitional landscaping between those two. But other than that, it's mostly parking lots and parking lot screening.
And this definition of minor is a very broad brush for communities that vary in size and type. And there are a lot of hardworking planning departments and planning boards out there who make projects better and improve them for all parties. And this is such a broad brush that it's
Absolutely.
not a positive.
I mean, the example, the 7,500 square feet, it's a minor, major. You know what Cranston's standard is between minor and major? 100,000 square feet. So that's one end, and then, the other side, 7,500 square feet is large for South Kingstown, but huge for, Exeter and Richmond and places like that. So it is hard with a one-size-fits-all.
Andy, just a thought, when you do send out this memo, not that I want you to have to rewrite it, but I'm thinking that it might be useful for board members if, as you go through the items in the memo, there's a description of the new requirements, how that differs from what we currently have, and then what actions we need to take.
I think it will be like two separate things, like we've done in the past. I think
Okay.
the first one's going to be, what have they done? And then there'll be a supplemental one, which will be talking about, okay, what actions do you need to do? That's what we'll do. Because if we keep trying to do it, it's a moving target. We've got to stop it at some point and do it. And then we've got to also wait and see what happens and shakes out with the legislature.
Exclamation point or question mark on the first one. Okay, let's move on to planning board liaison activities. Joe, would you like to start off with the Affordable Housing Collaborative report?
The Affordable Housing Commission, a collaborative, had a joint meeting with Narragansett This time, they attended at Narragansett. And I'm not really sure a real lot came out of that. There was a lot of discussion on what they're doing. They're pretty limited as far as the land they have available in Narragansett, to say the least. And they had questions and interest on what South Kingstown and the land conveyance tax. There was interest in having, if we go back when there was the joint meeting last time, it was in South Kingstown, and they had the Women's Development Corp and Habitat for the Humanity. And there was interest from both parties to have that again and to invite different stakeholders and maybe even the public. Although Narragansett, I think, was looking to try to have that late summer or early fall. And I think the South Kingstown wanted to do that a little earlier with our stakeholders. I don't know, Brian, what am I missing on
No, that's about it. The other big thing we talked about at that meeting was the housing study that Narragansett undertook last fall and that came in January. I have a copy of it if anybody's interested in seeing it. I think my big takeaway is that it largely confirms with actual numbers the things that we have suspected about URI's impact on housing for a long time. So if anybody's interested in reading it, I'll circulate it to you guys. Okay, I'll just send it to everybody.
Was that done in-house, or was that?
No, it was an outside consultant. I think it was Crane Consulting or something like that. And they got hired in the fall of '23, and they issued the report in January of '24. So it's very up to date. So to add on to what Joe was talking about, bringing Women's Development Corp back, I had some communications with Megan Sparks, the chair of that committee today, and they are looking at June 5th to bring them back and have a discussion. I'm trying to get them to firm up what exactly the agenda is for that discussion. We do know that at least one topic is going to be the financing end of how these nonprofit developers work. At least from a lot of the discussions we've had in the Economic Development Committee, there are a lot of people that don't understand how the the nonprofit development end of things works. The people on the EDC seem to think of everything as a for-profit. How much can you?
You shut off Andy's mic, that's why.
The return on investment you need to pay for the project. Well, that doesn't exist for these nonprofit developers because they're doing everything with tax credits and things like that. So I do know that they were interested in trying to get planning board members to attend. So if you want to make a note, I will keep you informed on where that stands. But right now it's Wednesday, June 5th. I think they're going to try and bring back Habitat because they're really two different models, right? Because Habitat does the land lease purchase sort of model, and Women's Development Corp does managed rentals.
I know that during one of our discussions, the last time you gave us an update, we talked about, could we have a planning board work session with Narragansett or some other community? It might be interesting, given the fact that we're all dealing with a lot of changes. Do you have anything else? That's all. The Scenic Roadway Committee is due to meet in June. So we'll be receiving an update from the Beta consultants at that point in time. I also had a question. Has anyone heard anything from Luke Murray about having another meeting of the boards and commissions that we had, I don't know, 6 months ago? Anything appeared on the horizon on that?
I have not heard anything other than Luke was making a wholesale effort, or the town is making a wholesale effort to have each board and commission have one meeting with the council per year. So that's a bit of a heavy lift, getting everything coordinated with the council. So I don't know if the additional work sessions with the planning board have been kind of front and center on that yet, but we can look into that.
Okay, thanks.
Yep, so the first item on the agenda is the facade improvement program. That is live. I believe there was a deadline for applicants to submit, I think it was June 7th, but that was recently, I think as of last night, extended by the council by 6 weeks or so. There's 1.25 million available for improvements, and distribution of those funds are based on funding amounts as to how large the project is coming forward. And I believe a hyperlink to the website with information on that project was forwarded to everyone. So I would encourage you, if you have any questions, you feel free to look at that hyperlink. And if you continue to have questions after that, give us a call. We can try to help out with that.
Jay, the other thing on the facade improvement program, last night the council authorized Jamie to reduce the number of bids on the projects from 3 to 2. So it's possible that the time extension won't be quite as long, because the big thing that they were looking for more time for was to get that extra bid on the project. So instead of being 6 weeks and 3 bids, now it's 2 bids and maybe it'll only be 3 weeks.
And with that, staff is also looking for a representative of the planning board to serve on the facade improvement grant program panel or committee. Yes, I believe it's made up with one member of the planning board.
EDC and HDC.
Correct, and as well as the finance director and another position, I believe.
The finance director, the planning director, and I'm not sure who else. I think Jamie was looking for 4 staff members and 3 board members.
Do you have a sense of what the time frame might be for these?
In what sense?
In terms of number of meetings and,
I think we'll have a sense of that once the application
That's right.
window
Yep.
closes and we know how many applications we have to go through.
yep. Anyone else interested other than Liz and Susan?
I would defer to Liz.
You happy? Okay, very good. You've got your volunteer.
What do we know about the extension and the quotes?
Well, Jamie's out the rest of the week. Yes. And then he's back in next week. Yeah, so I talked to,
Does that have to go back to council?
no.
Sound like we were up in the air.
No, council voted to give him the authority to,
Yeah, I would tell Jamie that 6 weeks would be the minimum. I mean, I've had 3 or 4 people, businesses in town call us for, help them put together their package, and they're just not gonna find enough. Even at 2 bids, they're not gonna find people. This time of year, contractors are, most people don't even call people back because it's so busy, so.
all right, I'll make sure Jamie knows that the,
I talked to him the other day about it.
okay. All right.
Next agenda item is consultant selection architectural services on affordable workforce housing creation. Can you give us some background on that?
Yeah, so this is for the architectural design services for the surplus properties. This was at council last night. Jamie requested that they approve Union Studios to come in and provide those design services, and that was approved last night.
So question, has any kind of engineering studies, will those be done for those properties as well? Is this just a separate element, or?
No, I don't think this is as detailed as engineering. I think this is more site design and layout. You know, what can we fit on it? How do we fit it on the property? Scale and massing kind of exercises, but not
So no
engineering.
engineering, stormwater, all those other things that, I mean, it's an architectural firm, so.
Well, I think things like stormwater are still going to come into play, because that goes hand in hand with layout and how much of the property you use and everything like that.
So does that mean they'll have a sub-consultant, or is that up to planning staff to provide that knowledge, or how's that going to work?
I don't know. I don't think any sort of sub-consultant is being considered.
If I were to gather, this is just a conceptual layout exercise to see what would the town get behind for the redevelopment, what could we include, and then once there's some direction, then you have something to work off of to go into the engineering details and say, okay, can we make it fit? Can we make it work? What other things are there? But I consider this the master plan stage, and preliminary will be happening later on.
Good analogy. Is there anything else on any other legal issues, Andy? And while you are at the mic, what are your ideas for any future trainings for the board?
I don't have anything specific for it, although I think, given the fact that we've spent a lot of time on what the legislative changes are now, I don't think it's worthwhile doing it until after the legislature is met and so forth. And we probably wouldn't necessarily do a training during the summer, so it'd probably be in early fall. I will let you know that Nancy Hess intends to do some sort of planners summit in the fall, probably October, early November, be in person Saturday morning, a couple of hours, a 3-hour session on a Saturday morning. And we're trying to make it interesting. We're actually working on coming up, basically doing a mock planning board comprehensive meeting with a comprehensive permit application. And trying to, and get, you know, comp permit lawyers to play themselves at that, and perhaps, and town lawyers to play themselves in it, make it realistic.
Can town
make
staff
it interesting.
can town staff attend and heckle?
No heckling,
No
no.
heckling?
You can attend, you can ask questions that will probably be disguised as heckling, but yes, obviously we'd love to have,
Those
you know,
kind of
staff there, too.
exercises are always great.
But yeah, so that's kind of what's in the works there, to try to do that. As I said, probably October or early November for that. And, you know, if there was a need to do some individual training with the town stuff, that probably would be in the fall, September, October
Okay,
time as
sounds
well.
good. All right, thank you. Before we adjourn, is there anything, Jay, that we need to know before our next couple of meetings?
No, so we have broken up the workload, the application workload into the next 2 meetings. Thursday, May 30th. That's May 30th. We have 4 applications, I believe. And in place of your next work session, June 11th, will be another special meeting with a batch of alternative applications, not the same ones that are on May 30th, different ones. So there's going to be some diligence, I think, to see these through, because I'm worried that some of these projects are rather large and maybe subject to continuances. And if we continue to get new applications, this agenda problem may continue into the future. So we'll deal with that as it comes, but that's a real concern.
And I would just like to ensure that we are able to receive our packets in an extremely timely manner. My last packet I received the day of the meeting, and I know that happens sometime, but we need to figure something out especially for this next 2 sets of meetings.
Yes.
I'd rather swing by and pick it up.
Okay, yeah. Most times when we aren't going full speed, we will make arrangements to have them dropped off. Many of you have seen me deliver them in person.
Yes.
Sometimes I don't have the time to do that. So, but we will ensure that you get them well ahead of time.
And if folks want to pick them up, just please let us know when they're ready, and
Okay.
that may be a more efficient way.
Okay.
So that special meeting that we hold on. There's no other special meeting. We did a poll to see who was available. Is that not a thing?
I don't believe it is, yeah.
Okay, so just these two.
Mhm.
Okay, if there's nothing else?
And Maria, one other thing just to
Sure.
report out on. Staff has put an ad in the paper for amendment to the subregs to remove the checklists and application section from the subdivision regulations, as well as any references within the document to that specific section. So it's a matter of just eliminating the references to the applications and checklists within the subregs itself. That should be, I believe, we're going to have that discussion on May 30th.
Sounds good, thank you. Motion to adjourn? So moved. Motion from Joe, is there a second? Was that Liz? Second from Liz. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Thank you, everyone.